flick my switch.
Can you hear me okay? Does this work?
Yeah.
Cool. So I put my phone down. It's habit. As Jeff said, most personal device. So I'm kind of worried because I'm kind of the, I think I'm the first PowerPoint guy. I'm the first PowerPoint jockey. Don't think that's because of my Microsoft background. It's because of my terrible memory. And also the number of people in the room, I've got to tell you, is somewhat intimidating. Don't feel bad. But and now the slide that I added when I was in the car coming from the airport doesn't seem like such a good idea. And if it's not a good idea, just ignore it. Make like I never showed you it. Remember that. So let me see if I can make this thing work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 35 minutes talking to you about personalization. There couldn't be potentially a drier topic for me to cover than personalization. So let's try and make it a bit zingy and interactive if we can. I've asked if we can have some controversial tweets. I don't really care what you say, just tweet. Be controversial. Tell me to shut up. Tell me I've got a funny accent. It's Scottish, by the way. It's not Irish. And then do what you need to do. Look, there's three kind of key reasons why I think you should care about personalization right now. One is that the people, the humans on the other side of the browser are changing. I'm going to talk a bit about some ABS, some Australian Bureau of Statistics data that came out just a few weeks back that clearly demonstrates that the nature of the people on the other side of the browser are changing. The second reason is that in online today, there are very few barriers to entry, very few real barriers to entry. And as a result, sort of anyone can set up an online business at any time and come compete with you. That's especially challenging when a business like Qdo, anyone in the room heard of Qdo? Group buying company? A few people. So Qdo, we set up with $70,000. $70,000 in 7 weeks. We were up and running, 4 staff on the day of launch. Lost around $300,000 before we turned a profit. And in 2011 was one of Australia's fastest growing companies, valued at $80 million in its 11th month of launch. So it was a rapid rise from 70 grand. That's European car money to go set up a competitor to your business. So barriers to entry is a reason why I think you should care about personalization. And then the last reason is switching cost. It's very easy. We're in a very democratic society and online. It's like this Uber democracy where the switching cost for consumers is so low they can just jump from provider to provider and there's very little loyalty. And I think personalization helps with that. The last reason is personalization has never been easier. We now have the technologies at our disposal and the data assets at your disposal. If we bring these things together, I think we can do something meaningful. Now, there's always a question, forward or back. Oh, here's the picture I took. Now, I took this picture on the way through the airport. There's a big thing right now going on Facebook where someone will put a picture up and they'll say, "Can you see what's funny about this picture?" If you can, don't mention it in the comments. Just share it with your friends. It's kind of a super viral thing, and they're very, very viral. I saw this picture and I thought, "Oh, geez, that's a bit odd." Now, the nature of this presentation will ultimately talk about this thing called cohorts. And I suspect there are now 2 cohorts in the room. There is the cohort who thought that picture's funny, of which I'm one. Any other people in the room who think that picture's kind of slightly odd and slightly funny? And then there's the other set of people in the room who are saying, "I have no idea what's funny about that, but I'm too embarrassed to ask." So anyway, I'm glad it didn't go down that badly. So as I mentioned, I'm running a company called 57 Signals. It's only been going for a couple of weeks. Is he really telling you what was funny about that?
No, it's just the third cohort which thinks you're a sick bastard.
Oh, sorry. I stitched myself up for that. Can you do that on Twitter, please? So I've just set up this company. It's been going for a couple of weeks. Okay, so let's get into it. So there's going to be 4 topics, really. The internet is all grown up. So really about the shift in the audience, the people on the other side of the browser has changed. Talk about some opportunities for growth, strategies for growth in online business, but also some barriers that we're facing right now, and I mentioned a couple of them. Personalization, why personalize, how do you personalize, and what does it look like? And I'm sure the majority of businesses in the room today are already doing this, are already quite advanced in their thinking. Someone thought that was funny. And then lastly, I want to talk about the power of failure. So I think this is my only chart with data. Apologies for this. Apparently half the room switches off as soon as they see a chart or a table or a formula. but bear with me. So this is, everyone's familiar with this, the nature of this chart, right? So this is about early adopters, innovators, digerati, et cetera, et cetera. I think what's interesting about this chart is that the current penetration of the internet in Australia, as announced by the ABS just last month, 79%, means that we're just about to move into the laggards. So really, it's only the recalcitrant few who haven't yet adopted the internet. It shows, you see how that line plateaus. The time that it can take to get from where it is today at 79 to potentially 100 is, it can take forever. It may never happen. But the reason I think that's interesting is the folks who have adopted the web, so 96% of 18 to 24-year-olds, that's all well and good. 71% of 55-year-olds. Now, the 55 to 64-year-olds was the fastest growing segment on the internet last year. So it went from 63, 64% to 71 in less than a year. That's a substantial increase, and that means the majority of internet growth that you're going to see from new audience, new participants, are from older people. And that's kind of scary, it's kind of interesting. And you should be thinking about that for your business. The last 20 years of the internet has all been about digerati and how do we accommodate the needs of the too cool for school, most of the folks in this room. But now we need to accommodate the folks that are a lot older. So 53% of people on the internet last year also purchased. That's interesting. That's a significant leap from prior years, where people are now getting to the level of comfort with buying in online. The barrier to entry in online purchase is effectively gone. I'm going to come on and talk about that. Two things that I think are interesting about the data that the ABS shared. One is that 15 to 17-year-olds are far less likely to use email than any other segment. The number of 65-year-olds who use email is around 91%. The number of 17-year-olds is about 80%. Kids just don't want to use email. And in fact, that trend is accelerating. The number of people under 24 who use email is declining rapidly. So if your business is focused on email, you need to start thinking about this, because the folks that you're going to want to reach next don't use the medium. They just don't care. Now, this isn't just people who've hardly used any email. This is people who do not use email. I do not have an email address. The other thing that's interesting for me is the Facebook audience, the 55 to 64-year-olds, our mums and those folks who are now using Facebook, and we kind of wish they weren't. That audience is doubling every single year. By a long way, that's the fastest growing segment on Facebook. Again, it's a fascinating insight that the folks who are coming through the internet today, who are looking for exciting new things to do, who now want to buy, are old. Anyone who's over 64 in the room, apologies, I didn't just say old. I did, actually. So I talked about e-commerce and the number of people who've used e-commerce. So around 68% of the people on the internet have used e-commerce, have purchased online. What's interesting about this data point for me is that only 5% of the people who, so 5% total, or 12% of the people who have not purchased, say it's because of security and privacy concerns. So that barrier just doesn't exist. It's just not material. The number of people who say they prefer to use a physical store is 50% higher. The number of people who said, I just have no need, is nearly 2.5 times higher. So it's kind of interesting that what we imagined was the key barrier to e-commerce actually doesn't exist. When I look at the internet, I kind of see this. Or when I look at this, I kind of see a simile to the internet. This is what it looks like for me. It's kind of exciting and a bit rough, and a lot of the language I don't understand, but for me, this represents the internet. It's a really exciting place to be. When you're 65 and above and you see the internet, it kind of looks a bit more like that. Holy shit, what is that? And, the dude in the blue shirt was the guy who said he was the expert, and then he stumbled across that website that he wished he hadn't stumbled across, and that's why she's making that face, because it was in his favorites. That's what was worrying. So if you take that lens and apply it back to the street scene, you see on the bottom left, you see Tony Roma's and you see McDonald's. When you're a late adopter, when you're a laggard, when you look at that internet scene, you see the things that you're familiar. You see the brands that you're familiar with. That's where you want to go because it's a safe harbor. You want to go to the places that people recommend to you, your friends and family, the people you love. That's where you feel safe on the internet. You want to use it. You want to adopt it. You know it's going to change your life. But I'd much rather use Tony Roma's than go to Endless Yum Cha and get some cheap suits handmade, which is what I would want to do. The online equivalent is Facebook and Google. That's where people will go. They'll go where they feel most comfortable. So as brand owners, we've got to break through that paradigm. We've got to help those potential customers break through the concerns that they have about adopting these technologies. So how do we do that? We do it through recommendations. We do it through speaking the language. We do it through actually facilitating a long linger time on your site, lots of details, lots of data, lots of reinforcement, lots of why do you buy. These are the things that make the 64-year-old's purchase. So I think it's an interesting opportunity when you apply that specific lens to the problem. This is also where I think personal becomes incredibly important. Folks of any generation now expect more from the web. We want to jump around less. We want to do the things that we're familiar with. And that's why I think personal is incredibly important. So channels of business growth historically and today include new customer acquisition. That's typically a way of acquiring lots of gross revenue, but often the cost per acquisition is quite prohibitive. So it's not necessarily something that's going to land in a lot of EBIT. Upsell, cross-sell, well, that's more about EBIT and less about gross market share. And then lastly, loyalty. If you can really nail a loyalty program the way a Qantas has done, the way Tesco's in the UK has done, if you can have a true loyalty program, the way Maya is trying to do today, then that's where you're going to take a share of wallet and you're actually going to drive real loyalty and stickiness with your consumers. That's where the barrier to entry rises significantly, and the switching cost is meaningful. And that's what we're trying to get to. And that now it's getting pair. I actually should say now it's getting personal. It's not getting pair. I don't even know what pair is. So I talked about barriers to entry. Let me just talk about that a wee bit more. So the shift in demographics, so we talked about that. It's about the expectation is shifting. It's kind of interesting to me that for the last probably 8 to 10 years, there has been this massive, this prediction of the demise in portals. Places like 9MSN are not going to exist in a couple of years. People don't care anymore. They just use Google. Well, you know what? The demise of portals has been massively exaggerated. They're still here. They're still speaking to 10 million people every single month. And I think it's because, over time, you go through that kind of excitability of you want to search, you want to have it your own way, it's all about your favorites. And then suddenly, you move back. You move back to the places that you're familiar. You just want to see the news. And the other thing that's going on for me is that whereas 8 years ago, the portals were trying to help you personalize the page. They were trying to give you options to personalize the page. You remember the Ajax? There was a lot of talk in 2006, 2007 about Ajax technology is going to mean that you can have your portal looking however you want it to look. You know what? No one really cared. But what I can do now is when I log in, the weather is pertinent to me. And it's very easy for me to personalize the page, add my Twitter feed. And I think that's why it's interesting, and I think that's why the portals, for instance, are still around. I want to talk very briefly about remarkable service. I think it was, Jeff mentioned this during the Q&A earlier. It's important to use the word, for me, it's important to use the word remarkable. You actually want to have a service offering that's so good that people want to remark about it. It's so beyond their expectation that they want to tell their friends. So it's not just about having a healthy support policy. It's about having a remarkable support policy. Now at Qdo, we didn't always get this right. I mean, far from it. We had some support horror stories and staffing issues. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to get it. We wanted to nail it. We wanted to have support that was remarkable. We wanted to have a refund policy that was remarkable. So what we did is we went and created a TV ad. We created a brand campaign. Our key brand campaign in the second half of 2011 was basically saying, at Qdo, you get what you expect or you get your money back. That was our core premise. We wanted to go out and just say, that's us, that's our business. You come shop at Qdo, there's no purchase and risk. And it became remarkable. It was about the brand. Now, we then had to go and create the infrastructure that showed that up. But we wanted to do something that was remarkable. Why? We didn't just want to give a whole bunch of people their money back. What we wanted to do was establish a barrier to entry for the industry. We wanted to create a watermark that people would say, geez, if we're going to go compete against Qdo, we're going to have to offer money back. That doesn't sound right. So we established a barrier to entry in the marketplace, and that was really powerful for us. We went a step further. We created an industry code of conduct, the group buying industry code of conduct. For a while, the group buying industry was a bit like the Wild West. There was a lot of crazy going on. Kind of still is. But the industry code of conduct was there to, was a watermark. It said if you're participating in the code of conduct, you've got a really high service bar. And we established more of a barrier to entry. This wasn't necessarily all about the consumer experience. It was about trying to make this marketplace harder to enter. That was what was going to be valuable for us long term. We couldn't just have 10 new group buying companies every week. So remarkable service, I think, is key. But I also think personal. I think personal is one of these interesting places that it addresses all three of these challenges that business face right now, the shift in demographic, the barriers to entry, the hyper competition that we're seeing in the marketplace, and the low switching cost. So let me just talk a bit about that. How do we execute on personal? So actually, I skipped past this one quickly, but let me just show you this quick. Everyone seen these ads on Facebook? Has anyone seen them? Stick your hands up if you've seen these ads on Facebook. So less than half the room. So that's interesting. This is to me, this is enormous. This is personal advertising. So you now have the ability today to go onto Facebook and say, I want to buy, if you're NRMA, I want to buy recommendations from people. And just because these 2 friends of mine or 3 friends of mine have liked the NRMA site, NRMA now gets to advertise as if it's a personal referral, a recommendation. Now, I kind of like that because I think these people know what they're doing. So that's interesting. Now, none of them are getting paid, incidentally. So this recommendation is free. That's very, very powerful in my mind. Bridges that gap for the older generation, too, that I want to go places I trust. So when I'm on Facebook and my son says, I like this, I'm not thinking this is an ad. I'm thinking this is my son telling me to go do something. So I think this is where advertising just got personal. So key question, geeky question here, but do you have a membership or do you have a remembership? This is really tough. Now, if you're in the process of setting up this business right now, and I know that someone I spoke to at the break just is, you've got to get this right now. It's very hard to go backwards. Do you rely purely on cookies? And I'm Scottish, so the word cookie doesn't necessarily, it's not intended to sound that funny, but it does. Do you just rely on cookies? The great thing is they're relatively persistent, they're highly scalable, and they're super cheap. Or do you have a login page? Do you have a set of credentials that are owned and operated by you? Lastly, do you have third-party membership? So do you syndicate membership data from someone like Facebook? I've got to say my personal experiences, the latter is a disaster. Very hard. The key problem is everyone wants to use it. They're like, oh, wow, I'll just connect to Facebook. That's easy. I won't need to put in my email address or my phone number or my age or my geography. It's too easy. And the problem is you then have disparate member bases. You've got a member base where you've got credentials that you own. You've got a member base that you've got credentials you don't own. And this has been a big problem for us. So trying to solve this issue early is really important. And I speak to a lot of businesses right now who say, oh, I wish we had collected more data. I wish we had asked customers for the date of birth, their postcode, how many kids they've got, but we didn't. Well, 2 things. One, it's never too late. Start now. You'll have deeper data on one set of customers than you do on the other. That's okay. It's better than not having it in it at all. Secondly is that there's an opportunity to wash the data. There are ways that you can use someone's forename to try and determine what age they are. Now, whether or not it's massively accurate, it's massively fun. If anyone in the room called Margaret? No. Anyone in the room have a mum or an auntie called Margaret? Yeah, a few hands have gone up. Okay, so if someone's on your database and their name is Margaret, she's probably 60 or more, right? It just is. It just is. David's a bit hard because there's lots and lots of Davids, but for some reason it was a fashionable name. But there are a lot of niche names that you can use that will determine with reasonable certainty the age of the individual on your base, and that's really powerful if you want to go retrofit this data back onto your base. Of course, you can use geo-targeting to try and figure out and retrofit that data back onto your base. But it's really important that you're constantly trying to furnish that data and that record with as much information as you can so that you can go on and do the next things that I'm going to talk about. Signals of personalization. Look, for me, there are 57, there may be 12, there may be 200. It doesn't matter. I had to pick a number. The URL was available. Well, let's start there. But to me, I've managed to figure out that there were 57 in Qdo, but they're really simple. A signal of personalization might be that you use a Firefox browser. It's very simple when someone touches your website to have a quick sniff and see what browser they're using. So the folks in the room that use Firefox, Mozilla, or Chrome, you guys are just the digerati. You're way up there, early adopters, super cool. I don't want to talk to you the same way that I talk to someone who's got IE6. I probably don't want to talk to someone who's got IE6. But, I've got to change the way I think about my engagement with you because your expectations are different. There's no excuse for treating you the same way I treat the IE6 user because it's not that hard to make the experience more personal. So there's a whole ton of ways. Time of day is interesting. Weekends are interesting. Someone behind a corporate firewall is interesting. Someone who's given you a corporate email address, a Hotmail address. People who use Hotmail versus people who use Gmail versus people who use me.com. There are a lot of different reasons why the data that you're gifted every single day can be used to drive up conversion. And let me just say this, and I'll repeat this. It is all about conversion. None of this stuff is for the good of your health or for the greatness of the experience. All of this stuff is about driving return on investment. So we had a very clear view at Qdo that every single touch point, every single dollar came back to some sort of effective CPM. Everything we cared about had an effective CPM attached to it. Now, they had two CPMs. They had a predicted effective CPM. What do we think this campaign is going to yield for us? What do we think this cohort or this persona is going to yield as lifetime value? And then an actual CPM. And then how do we reconcile the differences between the two to learn as an organization? Now, that was incredibly important for us to be a profitable business. We had to be profitable. We had to be profitable quickly. And we had to demonstrate to ourselves that when we were going bold and spending $10 million on a campaign, that we were going to drive that return in lifetime value. And lifetime value in a 3-month half-life, if that kind of makes sense. That's what we were aiming for. So it was somewhat analytical, but incredibly important for the business. So let's talk about the personas. Sadly, does anyone watch Modern Family? Yeah, love it. It's a great show. I'm Phil, sadly. I don't know if it's because I've got 3 kids or because I'm a doofus, but I'm Phil. My wife agrees I'm Phil. But these were personas. These were a handful of the personas that we've used in the business. And behind each of those personas is a relatively deep description of how do these people behave? What do they want? How do they want us to talk to them? What language do they want us to use? How long are they likely to spend on the page? And then lastly, what's their yield? What are they going to generate for us? That was important because we had to go acquire them. When you go acquire them, you've got to spend cash. When are you going to get it back? We knew that Kate was going to give us money back pretty fast. We knew that if we had to spend $12 cost per acquisition and found ourselves at Kate, that she was going to generate that money back very quickly. Now, let me just give you an example of how that works. So let's say you're on Qdo, you're building a campaign, you want to go find a Kate. You would never use the term, Kate would never use the term. It's Kate Winslet we're talking about here. Don't diss the Kate. Kate would never use the term fake Prada handbags. She'd just never do that. But she would use Prada handbags. She may even use cheap Prada handbags. Because what we know about Kate is that although she's got bags of cash, she's actually price sensitive. So we had to build out the persona to understand how price sensitive these people are. So they exist within segments. So we had effectively 3 tiers of data. Now, if this stuff is it's a lot to absorb here, and I'm guessing a lot of you guys have seen this before, I will happily share the presentation. I'll happily talk to my heart's content, as you can probably tell I'm willing to do, after it about this stuff. But effectively, there's 3 layers of the data that we care deeply about. We cared about the personas. Which persona did these people fit into? Which segments? How do we go target them? And then which cohorts do they exist within? It's kind of interesting if you're in group buying. Group buying companies now have the largest wine clubs in all of Australia by a long way because they've just sold wine to people at a discount. That's effectively a passive wine club. It's very powerful data. And it's something that each one of your businesses should be doing, figuring out your cohorts and monetizing those cohorts. Okay, I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to keep going. Does this stuff make sense? It's after lunch. I'll make you do jumping jacks in a second if you don't start interacting. Okay, let me talk about the value of failure. So Qdo is largely an email business. Over 60% of the revenue came via email. So we sent a lot of email. About 1.2 billion emails a year would be sent by our business. So our open rates, on one campaign that we did, our open rates increased by 55%. Now, I'm not going to tell you just yet why they increased by 55%, but let's call it, for the sake of argument, we'll call it a test. We'll say it was a test. It was a stuff-up, but we'll call it a test. As Jeff said earlier, no one died, but it was a test. But by this test, 55% uplift in open rates. Now, if you're a business like ours, that's significant. That's a $300,000 opportunity we've just found. What happened? Someone, for no apparent reason, sent 600,000 emails from me. Now, it was kind of annoying. I got a lot of out-of-office replies that day. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell is going on? It's also amazing the people you discover on your mailing list, because I've got these people emailing me, the managing director of Microsoft, saying, well, this is awesome, but I'm in the US, and why would I want to go rally car driving? I'm like, I don't know. Why are you telling me this? Anyway, what was interesting was they sent this email, they stuffed up, they sent it from me, 55% uplift in open rates. What's more impressive is the click-through rates went up by 172%. 172%. Why? Trust. People saw it was from an individual. It had previously always been from Kuro. So they thought, oh, geez, this guy's sending me this email. It must be important. I can trust this guy. He don't know me. But 172% uplift. It's a $300,000 impact on our business from just that one test. So failure, massively important to our business. Test and learn, massively important. Okay, let me wrap this up with a little story about Phil. So I went to so I got 3 kids. 3 kids under 6, all girls. Future nightmare. I went to see La La Loopsy, which really is a movie, last Saturday morning, cinema in Chatswood. Believe it or not, they play a DVD. I don't know if anyone's ever been to this, but it's a rip-off. You basically sit and they play a DVD in the theater, but the kids love it. I went to see La La Loopsy with my 3 kids. I bought the tickets online. They know where I live. They know that I've done this 3 times. This is my 3rd time that I've done this on a Saturday morning. And they know that I'm not price sensitive because I buy these tickets to watch someone play a DVD, which, you know, when you think about it, it's kind of a rip-off. I also always buy popcorn, and I sometimes buy soda, but I'll never tell my wife that. So why is this interesting? Well, for me, it's interesting because they never do anything about this valuable data. This company that I've been to now 3 times, the same Saturday morning grind, watching bloody DVDs about crap. No one's ever done anything. So why is it on the thank you page for my ticket purchase, they don't say, hey, I think you got kids, or you're a bit weird. Do you want to buy the latest Wiggles DVD? You know, they don't need to give me a discount because I'm not price sensitive, but I tell you what, 10% of the people that see that offer are going to buy it because it's easy. It's done. You've got my credit card details. You've got my postal address. You're going to do it. Why not send me an SMS 10 minutes before I get to the cinema saying, hey, don't forget to buy your popcorn. You go buy this new family pack thing. But they don't. They do nothing. And this is why I believe that personalization and this type of strategy will drive the greatest amount of value in online today. The greatest amount of value, and by a long way. And that's my Phil story. Okay, wrap up. So the internet's all grown up. People are different. The people on the other side of the browser, I think we've been guilty. You guys haven't, but I have been guilty of making assumptions that we're still talking to the digerati and the early adopters. We're not. The demographics are a key barrier to entry for folks. They need trust. They need linger time. They need details, data. If you're 65, you don't want to see pictures of 65-year-old people. That's not aspirational. You see pictures of 45-year-old people because you think you're younger than you are. That's what happens. That's what people want to see. Barriers to entry are too low, and the switching cost is too low. I think persistence is king. Persistence of data, persistence of trial and error. And there are up to 57 signals in the business that I founded. There may be more, there may be less in yours. And lastly, test and learn. Segment, test and learn again. Keep going through the cycle. It's all about failure. It's all about testing. That's it for me. Thank you. Thanks for listening.